Sudan under pressure. The African Union suspends Khartoum over its violent crackdown on protesters. And the Ethiopian Prime Minister is in the country to try and diffuse the tensions. But will it all work? And how much power is the military ready to give up? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Hala Mahieddine. With more than 100 protesters killed in the past week, international pressure is growing on Sudan's military junta to compromise with its opponents. Ethiopia is leading mediation efforts to end the standoff. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is in Khartoum, where he's due to meet both sides. The goal is for the military to hand over power to civilians, but after this week's violent crackdown, the protest leaders see little reason to trust the army. They've refused further talks and say they'll continue their demonstrations. Well, the African Union has suspended Sudan over the crackdown. It won't be allowed to take part in the regional bloc unless civilians are put in charge. The AU says this is the only way out of the crisis. But the military has been sending mixed messages. On Wednesday, it said it was open to negotiations with the protesters.
We in the Transitional Military Council open our hands to negotiation with no purpose but the interests of the nation, through which we can complete the establishment of a legitimate authority that expresses the ambitions of the Sudanese revolution in all its varieties.
But this came just one day after they ruled out any further talks, instead calling for elections within 9 months.
A legitimate mandate can only be made through the ballot box. As a result, the Military Council has decided the following: cancelling what has been agreed and ending negotiation with the Declaration of Freedom and Change Forces. Secondly, a call to general elections within a period that does not exceed 9 months from now, with international and regional monitoring creating a necessary environment for this.
Well, let's introduce our panel. Joining us from London, Adama Guy, author of Tomorrow, the New Africa, and former Information Director for ECOWAS. In Florence, we have Mahari Tadeli Maru, a Robert Schuman Fellow and former African Union official. And back in London, John Ryle, a Professor of Anthropology at Bard College and founder of Rift Valley Institute, a research body operating in East Africa. Welcome to you all. If I could start with you, Adama Guy. How significant would you say Ethiopia's intervention in this crisis is?
At least we see Africans trying to help other African countries in need. So this is a welcome development. That the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed precisely attempts to mediate there, as he has tried to do between Kenya and Somalia, and between Djibouti and I think Eritrea. That's something that is to be lauded. But the fact also is that Ethiopia is a fragile country and it cannot be the one that will be fixing the whole problem of Sudan. You know that there are other big players behind the scene, for instance, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Arab, and also Egypt. Egypt that is holding at the moment the chairmanship of the African Union. So those are important players, and beyond them you have the African Union, you have the United Nations, and you have Western countries, that, including, of course, China, that may have a say because it has been a major player in supporting the regime of President al-Bashir that collapsed on April 11. So I think that is an attempt which is good to salute, but you need to expand it and ensure that there is strength behind the diplomacy that is undertaken by Mr. Abiy Ahmed.
OK, is there not a danger, though, that we do have too many cooks in the kitchen at this point? As Adama Guy was mentioning, we do have this new diplomatic push from the African Union. Certainly Ethiopia has got in there straight off the bat, but there are other countries who have an interest and a very significant stake in here. Given this situation, Mahari Tadele-Maro, do you think that the African Union's intervention at this point is not going to be enough, given there are so many other regional powers at play?
Yes, Hala, I think the point you're making is correct. For the fact that the Horn of Africa now is a proxy battlefield for many actors, too big ones, to be easily heeding to unified voices from Africa or the Horn of Africa or mediation by one country. Clearly, the first one is that with the lack of unified voice, unified position, from the UN, from other actors, the European Union, United States, and so on, which is playing actually a different kind of role, this will be less likely that any single country initiative will work. Generally speaking, it's a welcome that the African Union has voiced its position, and Ethiopia is attempting its part, but these countries, the actors in Sudan's conflict are too big, too many, and they are too heavy.
John Ryle,
they are not going to hit them.
I'm so sorry to cut you off there, Mahari. John Ryle, if I could turn to you now, would you agree with this assessment? There are good intentions from the African Union, but essentially this problem is now too large and too international in scope.
Well, I think you have to look at the African Union's record. I mean, it's obviously correct that they should have suspended Sudan from membership, and they've done this before to other countries with mixed results. But Dr. Mahari is quite right in saying there's an awful lot to unpack in terms of the national interests, both of the neighbour countries and member countries of the AU and the international players. And I think that Abiy Ahmed is one leader in the region who has credibility because of the astonishing transformation under his leadership in Ethiopia. But whether he can do the same thing in Sudan, I think it's symbolically important that he's gone. And we await to see what he said both to the leaders of the Transitional Military Council and to the leaders of the civilian movement who he's promised to meet with.
Well, interestingly, that you raised that point, John Ryle. There has been much made of the situation, particularly on social media, that Abiy Ahmed has indeed met with leaders of the Transitional Council, but one key leader of the Transitional Council was not there. We are, of course, talking about Mohamed Daglo, or Hemedti as he's known, the individual who's deemed to be the real person in charge, who certainly has these rapid support forces under his command. John Ryle, what would you say this signifies in terms of a realistic way forward through dialogue if this individual was not present at these talks?
Well, I suppose the hope is that the other members of the Transitional Military Council are attempting to militarize him and possibly to blame the rapid support forces for the violence, which they were indeed the main perpetrators of. But it may just be seen as tact. He may have refused to meet them. I think we really can't possibly know. But what is undoubtedly true is he is the leader of the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces. They were not the only, but the main perpetrators of the massacre earlier this week, which was an act of really unusual violence. I mean, a lot of people were killed. We know at least 100 people were killed. Many women were raped. People were thrown in the Nile. This is actually a body count higher than that of many of the insurgencies elsewhere in the region. Although, of course, it's eclipsed by the history of this regime or its precursor regime in Darfur itself, where hundreds of thousands of people have been killed over the last 20 years.
Adama Guy, what are your thoughts of the likelihood of Hemedti sitting down to dialogue? Do you think this is likely, perhaps behind the scenes, he may turn back to mediators such as the Ethiopian Prime Minister?
I suspect that this person who has been behind the atrocious activities, not just in Darfur, but this past week on Monday, when almost over 100 people, it has been said, have been killed after a peaceful demonstration in the name of democracy, that this person is out of the game, because Sudan is a country that is known for eliminating political leaders who are problematic. And you recall that Mr. al-Bashir has been ousted after 30 years in power, and nobody is talking about him anymore. I think that the solution would come from those who are not tainted by blood. And the fact that Mr. Abiy Ahmed has met the person who is nominally the one leading the country is not something that should be considered as secondary. I do believe that you need to have a partner with whom you can talk and discuss, reach a solution and a way forward that will be agreeable by the international community. Many would not want to talk to this criminal who have killed people. So being a rough person, even though you may have the support of Egypt and other authoritarian regime, is not the way I believe forward. Last but not the least, I do believe Mr. Ahmed has a lot of stake in this mediation that he's doing, because with what he has achieved in Ethiopia, I recall I have met him 2 years ago during the Tana Forum. We have seen the transformation of Ethiopia. If he pulls this crisis out and fix it and appears as the one who has given a chance for the military to exit, which is the right way forward, I do believe he may be considered as a potential winner this year of the Nobel Prize. He can at least vie for it, because he has made a lot of inroads in democracy, in opening up his country, and in playing a regional role.
I think that's perhaps somewhat far away to talk of Nobel Prizes, given that certainly we're still waiting on hearing what's come of these efforts. But, I mean, realistically, where's the incentive for the army to step back and say, OK, we'll hand over power? As we've heard, there have been these atrocities committed, certainly a very violent crackdown by various factions of the military. Where's their incentive to turn around and say, OK, hands up, we'll just hand over power?
Yeah, but the military, they realize that they have really a small window of opportunity here, because the longer they try to cling to power, even with the support of those authoritarian regime of Egypt, Saudi Arabia and Emirates, Arab Emirates, that will ultimately be against them. They have learned their geography. They know the geopolitics of Africa. They have seen many leaders who have been in power and who have been ousted and who have exited peacefully. The likes of Mugabe, Zuma and others is there to be considered. So if they want to insist, I think they will create the condition of a civil war. And I suspect also, once again, we have to look far ahead. If I mention peace, the Nobel Peace Prize, that's something that one has to analyze in the long run. It's a possibility. But also, the worst situation, it may be the Somalization of this country, of Sudan. Because recall in 1991, when Mohamed Siad Barre was in power in Somalia, it was almost the same situation. But because he tried to cling to power, that created the mess that we still witness in Somalia. The same thing may happen into Sudan if ever the military people who are in charge at the moment in a fragile condition do not understand that their time is over. They have not managed properly the economy. They have not managed politically the situation, and the world is against them at this stage. They have to exit and allow others to take over the reign of power.
OK, Mahari Tadedi Maru, would you agree with this assessment that it is time for the military to stand down and they have an incentive to do so?
let me say this. First, the issue of transformation in Ethiopia and Nobel, setting it aside for now, there are 2 points that are critical. In my opinion, in the TMC, especially by Hamidti, there is a miscalculation that the Sudanese army is similar to the Egyptian army, which is not. The Egyptian army enjoys a lot of interest from Western and Middle Eastern forces. So it's not going to be supported like it's supported. The Sudanese army is not going to gain the kind of support the Egyptian army has gained so far and maintained and sustained itself in power. Now, in Sudan, I think there is a tendency to look this as example, Egyptian army as example, and it's not going to work. If there is a confrontation and the confrontation continues the way it's now, the people will win. The army will have serious problems, and ultimately, I don't think any element of the TMC will win over the public in general, because the protests are going to continue. There are armed elements in different parts of Blue Nile, Kordofan, and Darfur.
Okay.
And this will not continue like that. And let me add another point with regard to the forces that are supporting this. And they may not see the incentive. Look at Yemen now. Yemen is a dead end. It's a disaster. And the reason, we have forgotten it, actually. It was instigated by these external forces. Similar situation could happen in Sudan.
Okay.
God forbid. But I think there is a need for incentivizing these armed elements within TMC only if it comes from powers that are highly powerful and also have pressure and the leverage on the Middle Eastern forces that are active in Sudan now.
Okay.
And this is the only incentive. Ultimately, the transition will have to be a big tent where civilians mainly will come together to discuss on the future of Sudan, and the armed forces should go back to barracks. Its place is in barracks, and it has to maintain only the national security of the country. Beyond that, the army cannot serve or consider itself as a guardian of the unity of Sudan, while the people are already now in the highest level of inspiration, and they are destined to control the future of Sudan.
Okay. John Rowell, can I get your reaction to that?
Well, I mean, that's the optimistic scenario, very much to be hoped for, I think. One point about the army is, as Dr. Mahari correctly says, it's not really comparable with the Egyptian army. It's effectively become an alliance between the regular armed forces, the armed forces of NIS, the National Intelligence Organization, and the Rapid Support Forces. And the Rapid Support Forces are a sort of monster created by the government over the last 20 years as a counterinsurgency force in Darfur, which has now come home to roost, if you like. And I think the question is, who is best armed? Can they actually assert their authority over Hamidti? I mean, it's said that there's pressure on him to resign, that he's resisting it. And I think the Somali scenario, the truly disastrous scenario in Sudan will be a war between different factions of the armed forces in the center of the country. Because, of course, hitherto, war in Sudan has been on the periphery in Darfur, which has spawned this terrible violence, and in other parts on the borders with South Sudan, sometimes in eastern Sudan. This is the first time that the center has seen these levels of violence, and there's now a real contestation for the state, which is not simply the army versus civilians. There are interests on both sides. I think we also have to weigh up the real importance of the support for the, let's say, for the time being, for the Transitional Military Council from Egypt, Saudi Arabia. This involvement is very deep. These are all military regimes, of course, and there are Sudanese proxy forces fighting in Yemen on behalf of Saudi Arabia. So there's a sort of intimate relation between the armed forces of these three countries, which will be hard to disassemble. And a sustained civil campaign, that's let us hope so. I mean, Dr. Mudawi, who is one of the leaders of the civilian movement, has said about the sit-in in Khartoum, he said, you can end the sit-in in Khartoum, but the whole country is now a sit-in.
Okay.
Now, that may be true because the current movement started outside Khartoum. It started in Atbara, which is an old industrial city in Sudan, and spread to other cities in the central area. So it's not something confined to Khartoum. We don't really know what's happening in these other places because another thing to remember in this current situation is there's not exactly a news blackout, but a serious suppression of news media, including, of course, Al Jazeera.
There is indeed. If
real
I could
news
just, if I
is not clear.
I'm sorry to cut you off. We are into the dying moments of this debate. I am interested in exploring this aspect of the support of the TMC, the Transitional Military Council, and the various factions. Mahari Tadeli Maro, you had said that it's unlike the Egyptian army because there is no support from the West, but we are seeing significant amounts of support from the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, estimated to the tune of $3 billion. Have the axes changed? Because the West does not appear to want any part of this fight. The United States, the UK, the European Union, these countries and organisations are very quick to condemn, but very reluctant to play any part in this. Is the new dynamic now not bringing in support or condemnation from the West, but certainly the new axis of support now lies very much in the Gulf and the Middle East?
Well, I think the main point is what is the strategic interest of the West and Middle Eastern countries in Sudan. Of course, the Western strategic interest on Egypt is much, much long term, and it has complicated history, which I don't want to delve now. But it is much longer, deep in terms of investment and so on the armed forces and beyond. Now, on Sudan case, it's not the case. Sudan, in my opinion, will not be stable only. It will continue, the fragmentation will continue. It has already fragmented. South Sudan has seceded. Darfur and other places in southern part of Sudan have been claiming for a little, at least, autonomy, and in the eastern part also. Sudan is, as we speak, constitutionally brought together through the patches of agreements of different kinds. These patches could come and fragmentation could leave. Now, the armed forces is not as monolithic as you see in Egypt or elsewhere. And as such, it cannot have the monopoly of violence at once through the TMC. In the first place, TMC was a takeover of civilian power. If it was a civilian arrangement through the constitution, the vice president should have stayed there, or there should have been a civilian government of transition, of national unity, where everyone will come and negotiate. Now, the army is doing beyond its constitutional mandate. It's now ruling and trying to govern Sudan, which is not its role, actually.
OK, we're in the dying seconds of this debate. Adama Guy, if you would, in one sentence, do you think any mediation attempts can succeed, or is it over for the protesters?
I think the mediation is useful. At least it gives a window of opportunity for the parties to sort out politically the crisis. Otherwise, that will lead to military violence with the consequences that will be bad for everybody. I do believe also that the African Union as an institution, not under Mr. El-Sisi, the president of Egypt, who has a side in this conflict, should, as an institution, under the Peace and Security Council, come up with a solution to help the Sudanese get out of this crisis that may affect the whole region of Eastern and even Northern Africa, the whole of the continent, actually, because this kind of crisis, we cannot allow them to fester.
OK, and unfortunately, that will have to be the final words. Thank you very much indeed to all our panellists, Adama Guy, Mahari Tadeli Maru and John Ryle. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting the website aljazeera.com. And the conversation continues online. Just head to facebook.com/AJ Inside Story to take part, or have your say on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story, or tweet me directly @Hala Mahideen. We look forward to hearing from you. Until then, from me and the team, bye for now.